Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
I'm doing fine, but we have the same old problems.
Yeah.
Our government is still spending more money than they should, and they're saying they're helping the poor.
Yeah.
And just to make sure that the right people are getting the help, they hired 87,000 IRS agents to make sure the loot is distributed fairly.
Yeah, that'll be the day.
So we can rest assured our job is being very successful and more equity into the system. Of course, there's a little bit of facetiousness.
I think so.
But I tell you what, and we have room for that because I guess what made me think that things are sort of negative. U.S., here it is, anti-war, and they're good at giving reports on stupidities.
Yeah.
U.S. to send $3 billion more money, new military aid to long-term support for Ukraine.
Yeah.
So Ukraine must be pretty darn important, you know. I wonder how much the people of Ukraine really have to say about this. I remember they had an election, a few years back, and they had a leader in there. And I hadn't heard that much about Ukraine. I thought it was sort of settled. But all of a sudden, we got involved in a conspiracy. And our government, that is, conspired and got rid of the elected leader. And that was 2014. And a lot of people, including us, we date many of the problems and the spending and the killing and all going on from 2014.
Yeah.
Even though that wasn't the first time we've ever done things like that. I mean, we still mention 1953 when we messed up in Iran. But anyway, $3 billion more and people trying to justify it, how important this is. This is an important part of the world. It is. It is. It's a crossroads. But that means we should be really wanting to benefit from a policy of non-intervention. That would justify our policy, but they take it and say it's so serious. And NATO's being attacked by the Russians, and the Russians are stealing the property from the property we just stole from the Ukrainians. So the whole mess goes on. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure you agree that us involvement there, no matter how flowering language they use, it's not good for us. It's not good for them. And even this $3 billion, it's good for war profiteering. And I think that's the big thing. And that's been going on for quite a few years in our country as well as most countries.
Well, that part of the world is important, and you're right, but not to us, right? Because it doesn't matter. And we can actually put up that first clip from Defense One, and this puts everything in perspective. U.S. unveils biggest Ukraine arms package yet. $3 billion, not to be sent to Ukraine though, Dr. Paul. It's going to be sent just across the Beltway to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and the other weapons of war machine makers, who will then reap those profits. Their profits are up significantly, and then they will send some equipment over there. It's a very important part of the world, but not for us. It's symbolically announced on Independence Day for Ukraine, and I think that was obviously for a reason. But it's Ukraine's 31st Independence Day, so a relatively new country. As we know, the eastern part of Ukraine has been heavily Russian-speaking and Russian by ethnicity. So we're not talking about, centuries-old country. We're talking relatively new country that the U.S. has tried to, sort of have as a NATO member to provoke trouble in the region where it's not needed. So this is another $3 billion. Here's a couple of clips from that article, Dr. Paul, to put it in perspective. Let's put on that next one. Timed for the 31st anniversary of Ukrainian independence, the announcement arrived, and here's the clicker, Dr. Paul, just 5 days after the previous one unveiled a $775 million package. So just 3 days later, there's another $3 billion. And let's put it in perspective. This is a great next quote, if we can put this clip up. The almost $3 billion package will be the single largest chunk of the total of $13.7 billion the U.S. has announced since Russia's February invasion. And now listen to this in perspective. $13.7 billion just since February that we have spent on Ukraine. And here's back to the article. That total is more than the annual budget of some federal programs, such as the National Science Foundation at $9.2 billion, the Small Business Administration at $1.7 billion, according to Statista. It is larger than the annual budgets of the federal judiciary at $9.7 billion, Congress $6.6 billion, or the Executive Office of the President $0.6 billion. It's creeping up on the budgets of the EPA, $15.9 billion, if not NASA, $24.9 billion. Now, we're not happy about all those government agencies having all those billion-dollar budgets. However, when you put that in the context of we're sending even more than these big government agencies over into the black hole of Ukraine, it's astonishing.
Well, you know, we've done that before, and we'll probably continue to do it. But you know, this whole idea of sacrificing for liberty in general, well, I've talked about that, but this is sacrificing American people, you know, taxpayers and the whole bunch. So people do suffer from this. But I was wondering, well, they want to buy something. Well, we know what they really want to buy, and it's control and financial. But I would think the leaders in Ukraine would be rather humbled by our generosity and maybe even grateful and say thank you. But generally speaking, when I hear somebody speaking for Ukraine, they're annoyed with us.
Yeah.
How come you waited a whole week before you sent a couple more billion?
Yeah.
You know, that's the disgusting part about it. It's sort of like sometimes if you ever run into a family where in a falsely loving fashion they spoil the living daylights out of their kids, and the kids be demanding. You see the tantrums in stores and things like that.
Sure.
Well, in a way, that reminds me of that whole country. They're doing that, but evidently they figure that they're entitled to this, and yet there's not too many people happy about it. You know, the sort of sad part about the whole thing is that Russia are actually they're the beneficiary. So if you don't like Russia, you say, well,
why are you helping them?
Why are they doing so? They're making more money than ever before. So it's an unintended consequence, and they just go on and on. But there is going to be a payment. Of course, we're paying for it here at home because we're inflating and giving this money away. But the so-called alliance that we have and built and really played on Ukraine that's continuing to expand NATO.
Yeah.
You know, in the midst of all these failures, you know, the Congress just rolls over and say, oh, more people want in on a gravy train. And what it's doing is, you know, when you think of especially Finland, you know, right up against the Russians, and it's just looking for trouble. And even what we're doing in Ukraine is a violation of the so-called promises and pledges and the anticipations of the post-Cold War area. So we were supposed to hold back a little bit. You know, don't put weapons in Eastern Europe or right up against the boundaries of Russia. We did it anyway, and then, the Russians, they're getting annoyed with us. I wonder why they're such bad people, you know, which is a real tragedy.
And the real cynicism here is that the people pushing NATO onto Ukraine, the people pushing all these weapons into Ukraine since 2014, they're not helping Ukraine. They're harming Ukraine. They're the ones, you say that you care about the people of Ukraine. Well, we're the ones that care about the people of Ukraine. We don't want them all blown up for nothing. It doesn't matter if Ukraine's in NATO or not. It doesn't help anyone or anything. They weren't under threat before, and they are now. So the extreme cynicism is awful. But the worst part about it, the second worst part about it, I would say, is that this is money that's literally being flushed down the toilet. But the worst part about it, of course, is all the lives that have died and will die as the U.S. and NATO fights Russia down to the last Ukrainian. And you nailed that very early on when you mentioned that, because that's what it's all about. Well, our good friend Colonel Doug McGregor, who will be speaking at our conference next month in Washington, D.C., and you should get your tickets, he wrote this in the American Conservative, I think, today. Here's a great quote from the colonel who knows a little bit about war, I think, Dr. Paul. He says, "The hard truth is the introduction of new weapon systems won't change the strategic outcome in Ukraine. Even if NATO's European members, together with Washington, D.C., provided Ukrainian troops with a new avalanche of weapons, and it arrived on the front instead of disappearing into the black hole of Ukrainian corruption. The training and tactical leadership required to conduct complex offensive operations does not exist inside Ukraine's 700,000-man army. So there's nothing they could do with it, even if they had it. Trust a person who actually has the military background and the military experience. So you can't tell me that there aren't people, Dr. Paul, in the Pentagon who know this and understand this. The worst part is they do not care because the gravy train is rolling on by.
You know, he's taken a position, but he also points out that there's some fatigue creeping in with the Europeans and all, and that's going to be important because they won't get support. But he more or less was early on in analyzing the whole conflict with the Ukrainians and Russia, and yet some people say, well, yeah, it's not going so well, and therefore that's why we have to send them billions more. But he's saying, well, if it's not going so well, we shouldn't have even been participating in this coup. Maybe we should change the policy. But so far, I think McGregor's in better shape PR-wise than he was 5-10 years ago because not too many people knew much about him. And then, of course, when we were working on trying to get him to be friendlier with Trump and influence Trump, and there was a sort of a delay on that process, but he's still around and he still gets credibility, and I hope that we can say he's coming to our conference, and that gives our conference credibility. I hope it gives him a little credibility too.
Yeah, he's great. Well, you make a great point that the argument is, well, they're not doing so well, let's send some more weapons. And when you said that, it reminded me of our good friend, the late Walter Jones, who said, who's going to be the last man to die for a mistake? And that's exactly what this whole thing is. But, this is something that's related, Dr. Paul, because, we juxtapose this for a reason. As we see another $3 billion this week being sent to Ukraine, let's put on this next one. Now, this is from Bloomberg via Zero Hedge. A tsunami of shutoffs. 20 million U.S. homes are behind on their energy bills. So the Biden administration sees fit to send billions upon billions of dollars to Ukraine, and 20 million U.S. homes are behind on their energy bills. So that means, right, that they're facing shutoffs. That's what happens.
And, that's part of the cost. This is the payment that has come due. And there's going to be a lot of invisible costs that we'll never get to measure. Because when you think about power going off, most hospitals are well prepared for emergency power loss. Because I've been in a hospital, even in an operating room, and a thunderstorm comes along, you lose your electricity, but you have backup for this. But will every hospital have efficient backup? I mean, if there's so much inefficiency, and how long is it going to last? So people are going to suffer from it. And it's a sort of another item. It's not literally lockdown, but it's a lock interference, which is man-created. So there will be a lot of suffering from that. There is a financial cost, but it's also a lot of problems. Just the idea, once again, this came up with lockdown. What about the people who all of a sudden their credit cards can't buy gasoline for their car and they have to get to the hospital? Emergencies, So there's a lot of interference that goes on there, and a lot of people are going to suffer. And the worst part about it is nobody's willing to look at it from scratch and say, how this thing started, what is the number one problem, and I think that's what is necessary to solve the problem. You got to know what it is, and then you have to act. But in this case, they don't know about it, and I think we're just at the beginning of the adjustment. And somebody said, how did you know this was coming? Well, I didn't know it was coming, except for the fact that I know what they have done. It's past activity. It's when you print up and monetize $6 trillion within a year or two, and they've done it. It is not like, out of the clear blue, it's like a thunderstorm. In 3 weeks from now, we're going to have a financial thunderstorm. Now, it's not that. It's looking at what they've done. And of course, it even goes back further. It's when the people accept militarism And the welfare warfare state is really the source of the incentives for this. And the unfortunate thing for us is that the initial stages, it's a good deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And sometimes the good times last for a longer time than everybody dreamed. I would have expected maybe this to play out itself a little sooner. But there was sort of an adjustment period between COVID and also what the Fed is doing. But now it's the Fed plus the wars going on, and yet they still haven't really talked about the real reason this is happening and why 20 million people are worrying about paying their electric bills. And believe me, the electric companies are going to be not in good shape too.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, well, they're rich people and we'll pass a law and tell them to give them free energy.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
You're right.
So, like the students aren't paying back their loans. Oh, give them to them. Make the people who did pay their insurance pay their loan back. Make them pay. They're doing well.
Yeah.
It's really, when you think about it and they have the evidence, I say, well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And it is. And I think a little bit of sanity would straighten out. That was one of the things that pleased me most when I was campaigning, when a light bulb would go on and a student or somebody would come up and say, that is really interesting what you say. It's just common sense.
Common sense.
And there is a lot of common sense to how freedom works, but it's sort of, people are, have these blinders on.
Yeah.
They don't want to look at it because the initial stage is you're taking the medicine to correct what's happening.
Well, as you rightly say, it's not complicated, right? It's not.
Right.
But each family struggling to pay these bills and to fill up their gas tanks and to buy food, they should be furious when they see this billions of dollars going over to Ukraine and elsewhere. They should be literally furious with their government. But you're also right. This didn't start in February with the invasion. It happened before then. It happened certainly during COVID, but I remember in the early stages of COVID, you were talking about some real serious problems on the horizon before they even started. But it reminds me of the old saying, when you're in a hole, you need to stop digging.
Well, and if you're into conspiracies, every once in a while we think people conspire against liberty, is that was sort of their cover.
Yeah.
Because they've never done that before. But I think they knew how bad the adjustment would have to be, so they made it worse with creating $6 trillion more dollars. And that was, but could you argue then?
Yeah.
Oh no, if you did, you were treasonous. You were a terrorist, and you were going to take over the government. You're insurrectionist, and the whole thing. And so they made the excuse, but that was just a temporary reprieve. And right now they're still searching for a temporary reprieve. But one day, and maybe this is what we're talking about today, and not quite realizing that this is the reprieve isn't working so well this time, because it's always the same thing. It's always more government, more money, more regulations, and more authoritarians, more IRS agents, more wars, and it finally runs out of steam. The empire ends, and that's what people don't want, because they don't want to use the word empire. They want to think about United States' great contribution to Western civilization. Well, I have a different opinion on that.
Yeah. Well, as crazy as the Biden administration is on sending this money over there as Americans suffer, the Europeans are that much more crazy. They're literally, I don't understand what's going on over there. Let's put this next one up. We saw this on Zero Hedge. This is probably one of the dumbest people, I think, on earth, is the foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell of the European Union. He says, weary Europeans must bear the consequences of Ukraine war, as Putin will eventually blink. Now that is a huge supposition, because to this point, Putin was supposed to blink when they first put on those sanctions. This will get him. They will bring him to his knees. Remember what Biden said, the ruble will be rubble. But he didn't blink. And in fact, if you look at the next clip, the whole EU strategy is depending on Russia blinking because they're being drawn down to their knees. But put up the next clip. I just did a simple search. This is from last month. Russia's current accounts hit record on surging energy exports. Does it look like he's going to blink? He's making more money than ever. It's insane. It doesn't seem like they have a plan B. We're going to go with plan A, and that's all there is to it. He'll blink eventually.
The Russians and the Soviets back have infiltrated our educational system, and they got all these people to start believing in economic interventionism while they were selling stuff and saving their money. Especially China is doing that. They sell us stuff, and they take our junk money and quickly invest it in minerals and oil, and they save all that money. And people are always complaining, well, the Chinese won't spend enough money on their military, and because that makes it uneven. They save their money and spend it on economic development around the world, and they sort of act like like they're capitalists, and that sort of, I think, makes some of the American capitalists, the pseudo-capitalists, a little bit annoyed by the success of these countries that are actually investing in things that in the old days we used to invest in. Now we think we have to take it. So we're short of oil, and we'll invest. Oh no, that's old-fashioned. Let's go to Syria. And we can get a little oil over there. It's cheap.
Yeah, it's free, almost free. Well, I think we'll move on to the next one, because this is one that's near and dear to my heart, and I have to admit I do seethe with anger when I read this. Let's put on this next one. This is from Rebel News, and a big thanks to Jeremy Lafredo, who dug into this story and is reporting it and is getting some traction. Hats off to you, Jeremy. You did a great job. Amish farm under threat from the U.S. federal government for refusal to abandon traditional farming practices. Armed federal agents, Dr. Paul, went to this peaceful Amish man's farm in Pennsylvania and raided his farm and shut him down. They want to charge him $300,000 because he's not abiding by the federal government's decision of what farming practices should be.
Okay, under the system we have now, the people who want to do the right thing and they're motivated, and they say, well, yeah, there'll be problems, but we do know that some people are bad actors and they might cheat. And how are we going to control this? So we have to have the FDA come in and police it, and that's going to make it so much better. But what we're looking at now is the police coming in and closing down people. And you say, well, still, how would you control this? Well, one way you could control it is if they were selling food that was contaminated or unhealthy.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of what they're
Doritos.
doing, what the FDA does, who's getting the healthy food?
Yeah.
So they say, well, we'll have to check on that. But maybe lawsuits would be legal. But right now, you know, if you have lawsuits from the pharmaceuticals, we exempt them.
Yeah.
So we don't allow the market to work. But you know, there will be some, and the whole economic system and environmental system can be controlled by property rights. You know, what you do and what you do to your neighbor's property is not free license in a libertarian society, because you're still damaging property. So, but I would predict that this Amish village here and this farming group has not been sued for defective goods.
Yeah.
I mean, it's conceivable because all kinds of things can happen. But when you think about it, when you think about some of the damage done by subsidizing sugar imports to keep the sugar flowing and taking care of our sugar beet organizations. So we know it backfires, it doesn't work, and they've been around for 30 years, and it is really tragic. And it's not minor. You know, you mentioned $300,000.
Yeah.
You'd wonder. You wonder what their real motivation is. The only thing sometimes it boils down is some people thrive on chaos, and if they're looking for chaos, they are experts at this. They are really doing a great job of causing chaos from COVID lockdowns and this kind of stuff. It's such a basic violation on personal liberty and property. You know, to come in there, and they wanted to get away. One principle I think is so important is the system, which is a mixed system now, is that you always have the option to get out. I mean, and there have been times, and there will continue to be times where you're not going to be able to opt your kids out of government schools. and they've tried it before, and this is this whole thing. They can't opt out.
Yeah.
So this is the one safety valve people have, where if the government really messes it up, and we'll raise our own crop. Oh yeah, that's okay, but don't share your wisdom. And so they try to privatize it and substitute it. They shouldn't have to go through all that. But because it's being made illegal, and this is an aggressive, direct attack on freedom and especially private property.
And they're going to pick on the little guy who can't fight back. That's what they do because they're thugs. But the farmer's name is Amish Miller. And what he runs, and I actually know this very, very well. He runs a buying club, and they sell beyond organic food to willing buyers who pay a premium for food that's raised in a very, very beyond organic way. And I know because all the years I worked for you, I actually had a farmer. We had a buying club that we bought from a farmer in Pennsylvania. I'm not going to name him, obviously, now at this point, because the thugs will get him. But we bought very, very excellent, top quality food from this Amish farmer through a buying club, and we were all very, very happy. So this is what they're trying to ruin and destroy, happy sellers and happy buyers. They don't like that. But let's leave it to Tucker Carlson, who, to his credit, does a little segment on this attack. And let's just listen to the first 50-some seconds of his monologue last night, because I think he does a terrific job, as usual, cutting down to the bone of this. If we can cue that YouTube up. Here we go.
So apparently someone in the Department of Let's Wreck America as quickly as we can, and the Biden administration has decided we've just got too much food in this country, and the good food is the worst food. Food without endocrine disrupting chemicals must be eliminated immediately. Only wheat thins for you and some bugs. So with that in mind, agents from the Biden administration, armed, have decided to attack the Amish. Amish Miller, an independent farmer in the old Amish village of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, found out the hard way. The feds say Amish isn't adhering to regulatory requirements for food production. Again, not enough endocrine disrupting chemicals. You're not using enough GMOs. So with that in mind, federal agents raided his farm. They're demanding he stop farming. They're also trying to cripple him with $300,000 in fines. An Amish farmer. And Amish Miller says he's farming.
And my blood boils when I hear that, Dr. Paul.
Oh, that's horrible. And that means we're going to have to keep plugging away.
Yeah.
I mean, if we get a new supporter every day, that's one at a time.
Yeah, one at a time.
But, his points are perfect.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned the property thing, but, and I think he mentioned, well, how about the issue of religious liberty?
Yeah.
That, because that was worked in. I had a mixed feeling about using the religious thing in the COVID stuff. Yeah. It should be freedom for everybody, and not because you have a particular belief. But anyway, the religious factor is there, and I think he also mentioned about the use. They don't use gasoline.
Yeah,
you'd think the environmentalists would love these people, and then. They're anti-war, so they're not for burn pits and all this other stuff. And the people who are really showing how freedom works, and they have to be silenced.
Yeah.
And yet they're asking for nothing other than their freedom.
Be left alone.
And that is too much for these people who live and die, because what they want to live and die with is authoritarianism, that they know what's best. They brainwash themselves. They actually believe they're wise and they're helping people. But the large number of them know that the main thing is it's a bottom line deal, and that's how they make more money. Well, of course, in the military, that's real easy to see that. And the big farm food companies, they probably see, well, he's too successful.
Yeah.
If we take that for how many customers did he have? 4,000.
He feeds 4,000 people.
If they always had to go to the drugstore, well, you go to the store and buy groceries. Of course, now that's already failed. These people are becoming, more important. And I guess what I could see them resenting is there's a solution out there. We can't allow this. Freedom may break out. Other people might say, why are the Amish people, so good on the environment, and they're eating better than ever, and they spend a lot less money on doctors.
Yeah.
And yet same old story. But I think it's a good example of where the problems come from and what has to be done. But it really should make a person sick just thinking about how corrupt these people are. And some of these thugs that go in and close them down, I'm sure, boy, I had a good day today. I arrested 2,000 Amish farmers, and we roughed them up a bit. They're going to quit plowing their gardens with their horses. That's terrible.
And it's not just the Amish, people like Joel Salatin, who we know and is a great guy. He demonstrates that you can eat very well and protect the environment in the process. And there's a lot of solutions out there, but the government is in the way. Ask Thomas Massey about his bills about slaughtering cows and things. I forget the name of his act, but we'll put it in the link. But I'm just going to close out again with another announcement we just found out this morning, and I'm really excited about it, Dr. Paul. We can put out that last clip. I just talked to our good friend Jacob Hornberger, and he's going to come along and he's going to give a talk at our event. First of all, he's a great speaker, as you know, Dr. Paul. He's been there before. Future Freedom Foundation. Jacob Hornberger will be a speaker September 3rd, 2022, Westin Washington Dulles Airport. I will put a link in the description to get your tickets right away. Jacob Hornberger, Doug McGregor, Dr. Ron Paul, Jeff Deist. It's going to be a great, Cheryl Chumley. It's going to be a great event, and it's going to be great just to get together. So we look forward to seeing you there. Dr. Paul?
And Daniel McAdams.
No, I'm not speaking.
Well, you have to be ready. If somebody has travel problems or something, you're the fill-in, and you have to do it, and you have to give your own talk, too.
As long as we have coffee.
That's the deal.
All right.
No, I think today we did mention a few things that annoy us, and of course, I still believe that the majority of the American people are still anxious to live in a freer society and a free society than they are in one when the IRS is expanding and people can't even raise their own crops in their backyard. It reminds you of a Soviet system. So the principles are not complex. The results are wonderful. That's why they have to close it down and not let people see it. And that is exactly what happened in the Soviet system. If you even had one tinge of a free market solution, it was bad news for you. So they do not want that. They do not want to compete on a fair basis, because I think liberty would obviously stand way above authoritarianism. People would be happier and healthier, and there would be a lot more pleasantry in the country, and it'd be a lot less war. That wouldn't please us all. But that's the way history has been. But there's no reason why we can't minimize it and move in a direction. And you can find some statistics that show that we do, but we can also show you the statistics that the military-industrial complex and those who benefit are very much in control of our foreign policy, and unfortunately, very often bipartisan. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.